Well, welcome again, friends. We're glad that you're here. We have people from all time zones except Mountain. I guess there's not a Mountain person, is there? I don't think so. Many people from the Central Zone, one from the Eastern Zone. So there we are. Those of us in California, it's still sunny here, so it's kind of nice, actually. Welcome. What I want to do tonight is, as I said, to get through chapters 3 through 7. And that has to be done obviously pretty quickly because there's a lot of stuff to talk about. I do have one particular question right now that I want to put into your ear, and that's this one. I mentioned last week that it is possible, although there's no proof of this at all, it is possible that the book of Job was a play originally. I actually got this idea from an old colleague of mine, a man now long deceased named Sam Terrian, who was the one who wrote the commentary on the book of Job in the old Interpreter's Bible thing back in the 1950s. Sam was a French, wonderful continental French gentleman and a really fine scholar. He taught at Union Seminary in New York for many, many years. And Sam wrote this article a long time ago saying, is it possible that the book of Job was as he put it, let's see, it's in French, so something like, was it a play of the Babylonian New Year or something like that? Well, that got me thinking a bit about it. And as I began to read the book again and again and again, it seems to me there are stage directions in the book, conceivably read that way. And so what I'd like you to do tonight in the first breakout room that we'll have in a little while, I want you to play the role of costume designer for the play Job, and I want you to costume Eliphaz. What do you think he looks like? What does he have on? Okay. Now, of course, you have to make that determination after you hear what really has gone on in his speech. What's he saying? And we'll go through some of that quickly, and then I'm going to ask you to put clothes on him. I've got some ideas of my own, of course. I've thought about this for a while, but it depends a lot on how you hear what he says. And I'll talk about that when we get to that. But first, tonight, we have to do chapter 3, which is this really quite extraordinary poem that Job utters out of the silence that the prologue began. Let me remind you where I think we are. When Job loses everything first before he gets his skin disease, he quotes to the friends, not to the friends, excuse me, he quotes a speech saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return there, the Lord is given, the Lord is taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not charge God with wrong, making the Satan's comment that Job would curse God if God took away all that stuff, and that didn't happen. But then the Satan says, well, easy enough for that, but if you take away his wellness, make him desperately sick, well, then he will curse you in your face. And so the Satan then gives him this unknown skin disease, which is a terrible one, apparently. And Job's response to that, after his wife comes to him, you still hold fast to your integrity. Why don't you just go ahead and curse God and die? And Job says, no, you speak as a foolish woman might speak. Shall we accept good from God and not accept the bad? And I suggested to you that the fact that Job doesn't say that as a kind of direct statement now, but says it as a question, suggests that maybe he's beginning to wonder if whether or not his traditional view of reward and punishment, which he believed firmly, of course, is not happening, and wondering why it's not happening, and beginning to have questions in his mind, which now bursts out in this really extraordinarily powerful monologue, individual speech, which describes, rather quickly now, let me just summarize it for you. You can do this as well as I can. The first thing he says, the very first word out of his mouth, is a word that can be translated in several ways. I have in the past, probably a bit hyperbolically, translated the word damn. That's anachronistic, of course. There's really nothing in the tradition of Hebrew Bible that says anything like that. But the reason I translated it that way, damn the day I was born, is that Job is suddenly he's enraged and really is furious. And so his anger is palpable. One of the translations I have here in front of me by Robert Alter, whom I respect a great deal as he himself is a poet and a Hebrew a scholar as well. He starts the thing with a null, which I think is a little flat, but it makes the point anyway. What Job wants to have happen at the beginning of his speech is that the day of his birth, he wants to drop out of the calendar. He wants it to disappear. Annul the day in which I was born. Let it die. Let it not exist at all. Even more, turns to the night of his conception, 9 months earlier, and says, let that night disappear too. The night that somebody said a man-child is conceived. Let it all go away. I don't want it anymore. Implication, of course, is that means if his day of his birth and his conception falls out of the calendar, it means that he would no longer exist. His first reaction now to his desperate situation on the ash heap with nothing, scraping himself with a potsherd, is to wish that he'd never been born at all. Absolutely. And that's what he now goes on and says in an extraordinary series of poems here, the same thing. He uses an incredibly rich vocabulary. For example, the Hebrew word for darkness, there are about 5 different words for darkness, and they are all in this poem. The author of the book of Job is clearly a very erudite, rich vocabulary kind of person, and uses all of his skills to say things in some really quite unforgettable ways. Here it is. Let that, verse 4, let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it or light shine on it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds settle on it. Let the blackness of the day. And all those words are different words in Hebrew. Gloom, deep darkness, clouds, blackness. That's all different words in the language. Describing he just simply wants those days, the nights to go away, to disappear, never be there, ever. Let the night be barren, he says in verse 7. Let no joyful cry be heard. That is the cry that a child is born. None of that stuff, he says, any longer. And then he goes even further in verse 8 in this remarkable sentence. Let those curse it, or those who are skilled in cursing the sea. Now, the word sea here is the Hebrew word yam, but yam is not only the Hebrew word for sea, it is also a Canaanite word for the sea god. Yam is the god of the sea, according to the Canaanites. Now, the Hebrews borrowed a lot from them. I didn't mention this last week, but I should, that up in the upper coast of Syria on the Mediterranean Sea, the Syrian coast, they have a small Mediterranean Sea coast. In 1929, there was discovered a very significant civilization called Ugaritic is the language. The place was called Rashamra, and they discovered a hoard of tablets there, which talk about many things that the Bible talks about. Now, you should remember that when the Hebrews came into what became the land of Israel, the Canaanites were already living there, and they had been there for several hundred years. So the Hebrews lived cheek by jowl with the Canaanites. So that meant they shared vocabulary and ideas and thoughts. For example, Psalm 29 is a direct theft from the Canaanite literature. I know that because we have a psalm exactly the same in those texts that were discovered in 1929 in the Syrian place Rosh Shamra. The psalm begins, ascribe to the Lord, you heavenly beings, it says in verse 29, Psalm 29. And the Canaanite text says, ascribe to Baal, you heavenly beings. All the Hebrews did was borrow that psalm, lock, stock, and barrel, and drop the name of their God into it. It was a direct theft, as a matter of fact. And not surprisingly, because they were so close to one another. They shared ideas and thoughts. They may have worshipped in similar locations in different ways. The Hebrews lived very close to the Canaanites. They didn't just disappear when the Hebrews came into the land. No doubt they lived with them right from the very beginning and probably right to the very end. And so this verse 8 of chapter 3, let those curse it who curse Yam, the sea, those who are skilled, those magicians, if you will, who are skilled to call up Leviathan. Leviathan is again a Canaanite god, a god of the sea, a god who lives, a dragon who lives at the bottom of the ocean and rises up periodically to swallow ships. Leviathan is a significant figure in this book, as we will see. He comes up several times, particularly in the end of God's speech, in the last part of God's speech in chapter 42. So Job, not only does he want his day and his night to disappear, he wants, even if it managed to get away and appear, he wants magicians to curse it. Those who are able to rouse the monster from the depths of the sea. Let the stars of the dawn be dark, let it hope for light be none, and on he goes. It is a long, exhausting, painful, agonizing speech that he gives, because, verse 10, it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb and hide trouble from my eyes. The word that's used there, trouble, we're going to hear that word over and over again in this book. It's the Hebrew word amal, and it occurs regularly. It's troubles, upset, disaster, however you want to describe it. Why didn't I just die at birth and come forth from the womb and expire? Why were there knees to receive me, breasts for me to suck? Job wishes he had never been born, never, because his life is such agony, such pain. Now he turns to the longest description of a particular way of talking about the place of the dead in the Hebrew culture, which was known as Sheol. Sheol was a place under the earth. It was a place where everybody went when they died. It had nothing to do with whether you were good or bad or tall or short or fat or thin. You went to Sheol when you died. Now, most of the time in the Hebrew Bible, when they talk about Sheol, it's a place you have to avoid. You want to avoid Sheol. It's like a great maw grabbing people down, but not here. Job envisions Sheol as a place of rest, a place where he can escape this monstrosity of his life. Look how he puts it, verse 13. I would be lying down and quiet. I'd be asleep. I'd be at rest. This is the way the Hebrews thought about Sheol. Everybody who went there stayed there, and they were ghosts, did nothing forever. They just were shades, shadows, no purpose, no point. And of course, for most people, that was just terrible. But for Job, quite the opposite here. He sees Sheol as a place of possibility. It's wonderful to get out of this terrible trouble I'm in. It's filled, says Job, with kings and counselors of the earth who rebuild ruins for themselves. It's a terrible phrase, isn't it? Kings and counselors building what they think are grandiose buildings and cities, but as a matter of fact, they're just ruins, because eventually they will be ruined. Now, if you know anything about archaeology in the Middle East, particularly, you will see that Job is exactly right here, that cities are built right on top of other cities. If you go to Jericho, probably one of the great archaeological sites in all of the world, you can see a mound there, a great tower, which at the bottom of which Kathleen Kenyon in 1950 found a hand axe of stone that was ground in such a way to fit in your hand. That, as far as we know, is the first human tool ever discovered anywhere. About 12,000 BCE. Apparently at the base of that tower. And then you look at the wall of the tower, and there are approximately 43 layers of occupation, one right on after the other, one after the other, piled on top, piled on top. The reason, of course, is because there's a great spring at Jericho, a great spring which is still there. At its height was pumping out 35,000 gallons of water an hour. It was one of the great springs in the Middle East, and it was a wonderful place to have a city, of course, because that water source was always constant. So Job is right. This is what people do. They rebuild ruins. they pile cities right on top of one another. And the Middle East is filled with these so-called tells, which is the Arabic word for mountain or mound. And that means that you can, when you do archaeology, you're just digging through the layers of occupation which have occurred over the centuries. Or with princes who have gold and fill their houses with silver. Oh, they thought they were hot stuff when they were alive, but they're dead now. And the silver and gold mean nothing. They're all there. Why was I not buried like a stillborn child, like an infant that never sees the light? There, he says, the wicked cease from troubling. There's that word again. And there the weary are at rest. The prisoners are at ease together. They don't hear the voice of the taskmaster. The small and the great are there, and the slaves are free from their masters. It's a place of equality. Now, again, most people in the ancient world in the Hebrew would have seen Sheol as a terrible place. You don't want to go to Sheol. That means you're dead. But for Job, his life has become so monstrous to him that he only can see Sheol as a great place of hope for him, a terrible reversal of expectation. Why, he now asks in verse 20, why is light given to one in misery and life to the bitter in soul? One who longs for death, but it doesn't come, and dig for it more than hidden treasure. I wish, I want to die, but I can't do it. Who rejoice exceedingly glad when they find the grave. Why is light given to one who cannot see the way, whom God has fenced in? Now, there is a clear ironic verse, which I want to remind you of. Verse 23 of chapter 3, it uses the same word that the Satan uses in chapter 2. The Satan says, well, of course, Job trusts you because you've fenced all that he has around. You've made him safe. The fence for the Satan is a safety fence. But the fence for Job is quite the opposite. It's a prison. He wishes the fence were gone so that he could die. My sighing comes like my bread, my groanings poured out like water. The thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befell me. Now, I would argue that Job is referring here to chapter 1 of the prologue, where his constant sacrificing to God indicated his fear of God. I mean, he was afraid that if he didn't do the right things, God would attack him and get him. And it apparently has happened. And now Job he's distraught. He's horrified. He's in a passionate, terrible pain, of course. And if he can't die, well, maybe something else can happen. And that's what's going to drive him now as the story progresses. Truly, the thing I fear comes upon me, what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease. I am not quiet. I have no rest, but trouble, and there's that word again, amal, trouble comes. Well, little does Job know it, but yeah, trouble's on its way, and trouble is Eliphaz. Now, here's one of the questions. I've already asked you the question about what you're going to dress him like, but I want to raise this question with you now, too. The speech of Eliphaz, which I think probably Eliphaz, after chapter 2, did not expect to speak at all. Those friends were silent for 7 days, we were told, and they simply watched Job not say anything himself for all that whole week, and probably imagining that Job eventually would die, because according to them, he's evil. He's done something terrible. Obviously, he wouldn't be on the ash heap if he hadn't. And so now Eliphaz is forced to speak. He cannot allow Job to say these things. And what were those things? Well, you can read chapter 3 in a couple of ways. One way is to say that Job is really blaming God for what's happened. That is possible, not the only way to hear it. But Job at least sees the moral order of the universe to have collapsed. What he expected to have happened didn't happen. And trouble has shown up, the worst possible trouble in his life. And since he is now living in this monstrosity on the ash heap with nothing, He wants to know what's going on. That's going to drive him for the rest of the book. Job never contemplates suicide, even though it sounds like he's doing it here. He wants to know. He wants vindication. He wants to understand. And the friends think they have the answers. And Eliphaz, of course, is the first one who thinks he has the answer. And here's how he starts. Now, you can hear this in two very different ways, I think. And I'll reveal to you right now how I have heard it for a long time. And I'm not, frankly, so sure anymore. When I first read this, I imagined that Eliphaz was really a cruel and dark person who must destroy Job, not try to save him at all. I still think that's possible, but I don't think it's necessary. It is conceivable that Eliphaz is, in his own strange way, trying to be helpful to Job. But unfortunately, he is so arrogant and so unaware of the power of his own language that he cannot see that what he is saying is not just not helpful, it's also painful to Job. Now, this raises a very important question, I think, about this book, and that is this. How do we hear one another's pain? And when we hear that pain, how do we respond to it? How does one respond to a person like Job is going to be one of these issues that's going to keep coming over and over and over again. Now, it's easy to say that the friends are terrible pastoral counselors or something, but I don't know that that's too simple, I think. If it's possible that Eliphaz is trying to be helpful within the bounds of his own understanding of what's happening, and yet cannot see that his words are not helpful but painful, then the audience, if this is a play, is going to have a certain reaction, I think, to this. And we'll talk about this some more as we go through. Now, what I want you to do is to listen to Eliphaz's words, and we don't have time to do all of them, of course, but to play them out a little bit here and see what it is he's trying to say. First, verse 2, chapter 4. If one ventures a word with you, will you be offended? Now, you could take that as a pleasant opening comment, if you will. I know it's terrible, Job, but would I offend you by saying something? Can you listen to what I've got? But who can keep from speaking? I mean, I can't keep quiet. Look, you have instructed many. Job was the paragon of greatness and wisdom. So clearly, Eliphaz knows that he's been a great help to many, many people. You've strengthened weak hands. Your words have supported the stumbling. You've made firm the feeble knees. But now it comes to you and you're impatient. It touches you and you're dismayed. You're upset. Now, hold on, Job. Is not your fear of God your confidence? Is not the integrity of your ways, your actions, your hope? Now let's unpack that just a bit. You remember the phrase fear of God was used twice in the prologue. Job was described as one who, quote, feared God, chapter 1, verse 1. And then God, Yahweh, speaks to the heavenly court, to the Satan particularly, and says, have you noticed my servant Job? He is one who fears God. Both God and the storytellers say it. And now Eliphaz says, is not your fear of God your confidence? And of course, for those of us who are watching the play, the answer is no, it's clearly not. Job's fear of God got him nowhere. It got him on the ash heap with nothing. So Eliphaz may think this is the kind of language Job needs to hear, but we know that its language is not going to say much on behalf of Job at all. Job can only hear this through the years of his own experience. Think now, says Eliphaz in verse 7, who that was innocent ever perished? There's the word innocent. You remember that word? That's the word also used in chapter 1, verse 1 and chapter 1, verse 8. Job is blameless, innocent, and upright, it says. And now Eliphaz says, who that was innocent ever perished? And the answer to that, unbeknownst to Eliphaz, is the person sitting in front of him on the ash heap. It's Job, the innocent one, who is perishing before his eyes. But I would argue then that Eliphaz uses his own theological position to try to teach Job what he must do. And of course, for Eliphaz, what Job has to do is believe as Eliphaz believes. And if he doesn't, then he's in big trouble. If he doesn't, he'll continue on the ash heap. And that's what got him there in the first place, according to Eliphaz. As I have seen it, verse 8, those who plow iniquity and who sow trouble reap the same. Now, that's a good wisdom phrase. It's used in the Proverbs all the time. It's used in other places in the wisdom school. But how would Job hear it? Put your Job ears on. Listen to that. As I have seen it, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. The implication is you must have sowed a whole lot of trouble, Job, because you're reaping it. I can see it with my own eyes. Now, this goes on like this. Eliphaz, within the bounds of his idea that God rewards and punishes, an idea that Job also shares, but it's not working for him anymore. He keeps pounding away. Job, 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 if you'll just listen carefully to this, I know these things. I know these. Now, you can argue this way. Either Eliphaz is overtly cruel with his speaking, or he is unaware of the cruelty of his speaking. Either way, it's not very helpful to Job, that's for sure. Now, Eliphaz turns to a vision. It's one of the great pictures of a vision in all of the Bible, actually. Eliphaz believes that he has been visited by God in a special visitation, beginning in verse 12. A word came stealing to me, the ear received the whisper of it amid thoughts and visions of the night when deep sleep falls on mortals. The word deep sleep there is the Hebrew word tardema. It's only used in very specific places in the Hebrew Bible, used in places, for example, in the book of Genesis, when Adam falls asleep, that's the word that's used when the rib is taken from his side and built into the woman. In the book of Jonah, when Jonah falls asleep in the hold of the ship in chapter 1, he gets a tardema, it falls on him. And there are several other places in the Hebrew Bible where that word is used. It's a specific word. It doesn't mean just sleep. It means a divine sleep. Eliphaz wants to say that he's received a divine sleep from Yahweh, from God. And the dread came upon me, and trembling, and all my bones shook, and a spirit, a form glided past my face, and the hair of my flesh bristled up. It stood still. I could not discern its appearance. A form, Tamunna, was before my eyes, and silence. And then I heard a voice. And what the voice says is very unusual. Two ways to translate it, at least. The RSV reads, can mortals be righteous before God? Well, you can also read it, as some also read it, can mortals be more righteous than God? Can human beings be more pure than their maker? Why, God doesn't even trust God's servants or angels. Why should God trust you? In other words, here's Eliphaz's second way of saying to Job that he shouldn't get himself all head up about things because human beings are just dust. They are untrustworthy, dusty creatures. That's why he says what he says in verse 19. Hey, how much more those who dwell in houses of clay? You and I, our bodies are houses of clay. That's what it says in Genesis 2. We are formed from the dust of the ground. We all know that. Foundation in the dust, who are crushed just like a moth. Between morning and evening, they are destroyed. They perish forever without anybody knowing it. Human beings are small, infinitesimal, not valuable, not trustworthy, not beings to be taken with seriousness at all. This again is supposed to make Job feel better, I guess. Does it make him feel better? And now in chapter 5, Eliphaz concludes his long speech. Call down, verse 1, is there anyone who can answer you? To which of the holy ones will you turn? Now that's an interesting phrase. In other places in this book, as we will see in chapter 9 and chapter 16 and chapter 19, Job will turn to one of the holy ones in a very interesting series of passages. We'll get there when we talk about that. But Job, vexation kills the fool and jealousy slays the simple. I've seen these things happen. I've seen them taking root, fools taking root, and suddenly they're cursed and their roots are gone, and on it goes like this. And as for me, verse 8, I would seek God. To God I commit my cause. God does, and it goes on with a long poem now, a wisdom poem that has no doubt been, he's taught and learned over his life. He does great things, unsearchable. If you read other places, you will see this, Psalm, for example, 39. He gives rain on the earth, sends water in the field, high those who are lowly, etc., 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 etc. So the poor have hope in verse 16, and the injustice shuts its mouth. How happy is the one whom God reproves, verse 17. In other words, Job, you should take this assault on you as a gift from God. It is a teaching from which you should be learning. Now, these are all traditional ways that people talk, aren't they? You know, God never gives us more than we can withstand. Have you heard that one before? Well, here it is. This is supposed to buoy Job up, make him feel better. He wounds, he binds up, he strikes, his hands heal. Oh, he'll deliver you from 6 troubles. In famine, he'll redeem you from death, and in war from the power of the sword. You'll be hidden from the scourge. You'll be at league with the stones of the field. You'll know your tent is safe. You'll inspect your fold and miss nothing. You'll know your descendants will be many. Oh my gosh, after all of his children have been killed by the terrible storm, and your offspring like the grass of the earth, really? You shall come to your grave in a ripe old age. A shock of grain comes up in the threshing floor. Look, we have searched this out. It's true. Here, know it for yourself. Now, after that, I dare say Eliphaz does not expect any response. He is the kind of man who is used not to being questioned because he's got the truth. And if you accept his truth, you're okay. But if you don't, well, there's trouble afoot then for sure. So I imagine as he ends that lovely sermon, he expects Job to grovel in front of him and say, oh, thank you so much, Eliphaz. You've made my way clear now. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm sorry for it all. But Job won't say that. No, he's got a long way to go before he gets anything like that. And Eliphaz is going to be very surprised to hear what Job has to say. Okay, let's do a breakout for 5 minutes. 9 or 4 minutes, did we say 5? I can't remember. And I want you to put clothes on Eliphaz, dress him, and now that you understand, have your own view of how he speaks. Is he cruel? Is he unaware cruel? Well, whichever way it goes. What do you think he looks like? Okay, go for it. Okay, anybody got anything you'd like to say? What do they look like? Give me a dressing.
I wonder if he's not wearing a mask and some kind of protective gear. He doesn't want to pick up the disease of Job.
Yes,
I like that.
Kim had an excellent perspective, I think, and Denise found the picture.
Denise, right. Oh, yes, there he is. Joel Osteen himself.
The prosperity gospel that, if you just do all the right things, you'll be fine and rich. And
that's right.
That's how we're dressing up our character.
That's good. Well, he looks really good. He's got $3,000 suits. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Bet.
It's obnoxious, but appropriate.
Very appropriate. Yep. That's good. I like that. That's the modern one. I've often thought about him having in the ancient time, having a sort of long robe with moons on it and one of those big pointy hats, and he's got high heels.
You're doing a disservice to the people who actually do prophesy from that perspective.
Well, I wanted to raise the question with you too. Once you've thought about that, think about this too. How do you talk to a Job? I mean, what does a Job need from you? I mean, that's going to be a question that's going to keep coming up over and over and over again. None of these people are going to be quiet. They're going to say hordes of stuff of all kinds. But is that appropriate? Is that right? People want to engage in theological debate now when Job's on an ash heap scraping himself with a potsherd? Is it time for theological discussion? Well, it may not be. Well, keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that in a bit. Okay. Now let's get to Job's speech. Oh, first, one more comment.
Mute yourselves.
All right. Mute yourselves. Yeah. Thank you. Now we get to Job's speech 6. And of course, right away, Eliphaz will be shocked and horrified by what Job says. In chapter 6, verse 2, he says, "Oh, that my vexation were weighed." The word vexation is the Hebrew word noun ka'as, which Eliphaz already used in chapter 5. He said, verse 2, vexation, ka'as, kills the fool. So the word means something really awful has happened, and as a result of that, I'm in turmoil. So look, Eliphaz, I understand that your belief is that we shouldn't be vexatious, we shouldn't be so upset. But my heaven, look where I am, boy. If my vexation were weighed, it would be my calamity laid in the balance. It's heavier than the sand of the sea, for heaven's sakes. Look, that's why my words have been so rash. I'm not shouting for no reason here. The arrows of Shaddai are in me. My spirit, my life drinks their poison. Well, that's the first, if you will, direct statement that Job accuses God of assaulting him. Well, he's driven to that, of course, already because he can't think anything else. His view has been that God rewards and punishes. And now God is not rewarding and punishing, even though he's been the wisest and finest and most moral man in the East. And he ends up with nothing. And he can only imagine that God has it in for him. He doesn't know why, he has no idea why. You're going to see what that's going to drive him to here in just a minute. But he believes that God is using him for target practice. The word Shaddai here is a typical one of the Hebrew words for God. We don't know exactly what the word means, where it comes from. Usually it has something to do with mountains, maybe, but beyond that, we don't really know much about it. They usually translate Almighty. That's the NRSV's translation anyway. And then he talks for a while about how, look, I'm not shouting for no reason. Does a wild ass bray over its grass? If a wild ass is eating grass, it's not braying. It's satisfied. If I wouldn't be shouting if I were satisfied. I'm not satisfied. Verse 8, if only I might have my request that God would grant my desire. You talk about God's desire? Here's my desire, that God would loose God's hand and cut me off. If God's in the business of shooting arrows into me, then let God go ahead and get it over with. Just do the whole thing. Now he's back to his desire in chapter 3, to be dead, to be dead. That would be my consolation, would even exult in unrelenting pain. He's a kind of masochist here, isn't he? It's quite terrible. What is my strength that I should wait? What's the end that I should be patient? Is my strength the strength of stones? Now he's responding to Eliphaz. Eliphaz says, oh, if you just turn your life over to God, everything will be fine and your tent will be great and your descendants many. Look, I can't wait any longer. Look at me, for heaven's sakes, look at me. In truth, I have no help in me and any resource is driven from me. Now, verse 14 is a very interesting verse, but it's very hard to translate in the language. The NRSV reads, those who withhold kindness from a friend forsake the fear of Shaddai. And that's close probably to what it means. The implication is one of the ways you can evaluate whether a friend has real kindness is to see how they treat people like Job, who have apparently, by their lights, forsaken the fear of Shaddai. I think that's probably what it says. At least that's a good one. But you know, my companions are treacherous like a torrent bed. The Hebrew word here is wadi. It is like in the Southwest, we have what we call arroyo, which are dry riverbeds which fill up with rain during the rainy season and then dry out in the summer. And Job will now play that one out for 5 or 6 verses where he talks about the friends being just like dry torrent beds. You expect water from them. They're not giving you any water. They're dry. They're useless. They're terrible. Such now have you become to me. Verse 19, caravans of Tama look, and the travelers of Sheba hope. By the way, Tama is in the far north of what we call now Arabia, and Sheba is in the far south of Arabia. This is the whole width of the Arabian Peninsula, if you will, that the author is talking about here. And of course, there were caravans that went back and forth between this. If you've ever seen pictures of the Arabian Peninsula, it's very flat and very dry. And so you look for the watering holes to survive in the long journey, hundreds of miles from Tama to Sheba. And so they go, but they get fooled too, these caravans. They go to try to find that, but they can't find. You're like you friends who like that. Look, verse 22, have I ever said to you, make a gift for me, or from your own wealth, offer a bribe? Have I said that to you? Save me from the opponent's hand, ransom me from the hand of oppressors. Look, teach me, I'll be silent, make me understand how I have gone wrong. If you think I've done something worthy of this disaster, then you tell me what it is. But how forceful are honest words. But your reproof, your attack on me, what does it possibly reprove? Do you think that you can reprove words as if the speech of the desperate were only wind? It's insane. You'd even cast lots over an orphan and bargain over your friend. I know what kind of people you are. But now watch. Here, I think, is a stage direction. Now, verse 28, be pleased to look at me. And I would argue that what they've done is turn their back on him. I mean, that Eliphaz has made his claim. He hears Job saying these awful things about them, like they're dry torrent beds. Hey, they turn their back. They're not going to listen to this garbage. Turn, look me in the face. Now look me. I let no wrong be done. Turn, my vindication's at stake. You let me know what I have done. Is there any wrong on my tongue? Cannot my taste discern calamity? I know what's bad and good in the world. So turn around, teach me, tell me. And then in chapter 7, he reverts to a dark and broody mood again, rather like his first speech in chapter 3. Do not human beings have a hard service on earth? The word hard service translated here is the word tzara in Hebrew, and that's the same word that's used in Isaiah chapter 40, the one about comfort, comfort my people, because their time of service is over, says Isaiah. And that's the word that Job uses here. But it's quite the different. Here for Job, human beings, all human beings have nothing but hard service on the earth. And aren't there days like the days of a laborer, like a slave who longs for the shadow, a slave who works all day in the hot sun and is anxious at the end of the day to find some shade and waiting for their payment, their day laborer payment. Just so I'm allotted months of emptiness. And the word empty is the word that Ecclesiastes uses in chapter 1, the word hevel. It means insubstantialness, emptiness. The old King James Version, of course, translated that not wind of wind, but talk, you know the phrase at the beginning of Ecclesiastes. When and the nights of misery are appointed for me. When I lie down, I say, when shall I rise? But though the night is long, I'm filled with tossing until the dawn, and my flesh is clothed with worms and dirt, and my skin hardens and breaks out again, referring, I trust, to his terrible skin disease, I suppose. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. It's a wonderful pun here that you cannot get into English. And come to their end without hope. The word hope in Hebrew is the word tikwa, And it is exactly the same word as the word for thread. Hope is like a thread, says Job, and it runs out. That's where I am in my life. Remember, my life is a breath. It's just a breath. It's just a small thing. My eye will never again see good. The eye that beholds me will see me no more. While your eyes are upon me, I'll be gone. Just as the cloud fades and vanishes, so those who go down to Sheol never come up. Never. They return no more to their houses, nor do their places know them anymore. Therefore, I will not restrain my mouth. You see what Job is saying is, I know I'm going to die anyway, so I'm going to tell the pain that I feel directly. I'll speak in the anguish of my spirit. I'll complain in the bitterness of my soul. And now he says something really extraordinary in verse 12. Am I the sea, Yam, there's that phrase, that word again from the Canaanite culture, or the dragon? The word translated dragon here is the word tanin, which also is from the Canaanite mythology. It's again another word for the dragon under the ocean. Am I Yam or tanin that you set a guard over me? Have you confused me, God, with the monster of the sea? I'm just Job. I'm just tiny Job. When I say that my bed will comfort me, my couch ease my complaint, oh, you scare me with dreams. Yeah, Eliphaz scared him with dreams, didn't he? And terrify me with visions, so that I choose strangling and death rather than this terrible body. I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Let me alone, my days are a breath. Now he parodies Psalm 8 quite directly. Remember Psalm 8? What are human beings that you think so much of them and care for them? Job turns it upside down. He says, what are human beings that you make so much of them, that you set your mind on them, that you visit them every morning and test them every moment? Why don't you look away from me for a while? Just let me alone until I swallow my spit. Oh boy, he's really on a roll now, isn't he? Huh. If I sin, what do I do to you, watcher of humanity? Even if you can show me something that I've done, what's the point to you? You're God, I'm a human being, that's all. Why have you made me your target? Why have I become a burden? Well, how can I be a burden to you? Why don't you just pardon my transgression and take away whatever iniquity I've got? Because now I'm about to lie down in the earth, and you'll seek for me, but I won't be there. Too bad for you, God. I'm going to be gone. And you're going to look for me and, oh, where's my old buddy Job? And I'm going to be dead in Sheol. Now, the Hebrews believed several things about Sheol. There are two Psalms. Let me remind you of those. In Psalm 88, it says very clearly that the dead do not praise Yahweh. Implication theologically, God is not in Sheol. You don't find God in Sheol. But Psalm 139 says quite the opposite. Where can I go from your spirit? If I ascend into the skies, you are there. If I descend into Sheol, you are there. So obviously, in Hebrew theology and reflection, they didn't all think the same things. Some imagined that God was everywhere. Some imagined that God was not in Sheol at all. Both of them are there quite directly in the tradition. Remember, the Bible is written over 1,000 years. So there's a huge variation of ideas and thoughts reflected and running around in it. For Job, he believes firmly, as he said to us earlier, that Sheol was the place where you went and died, and that was it. You were gone. You were shade, shadow. You did nothing. You rested. You were quiet. You were free from misery and all that. Well, Job leaves a terrible claim here at the end of his first lengthy speech by saying, challenging God. Look, you're attacking me. I don't know why, but I'm about to die, and you're going to be sorry then. Huh? You're going to be sorry. You're going to look for me, and I'm not going to be around anymore. So up to now, what you've got is Job, his pain has driven him to this wild notion that he's about to die, that God is attacking him for reasons he didn't understand. And you can jolly well bet after that speech that the friends are going to have some more stuff to say. They're not going to let that go. They're not going to allow Job to accuse God of attacking him for no reason. Oh, no. They are flat convinced, of course, that Job has done something monstrous to find himself on an ash heap, because that's their theology. That's the way it works. That's the way it functions. Okay, we have time, I guess, Dinah, to do another little thing here. I want you to reflect for a moment with some other people on Job's reply to Eliphaz. What do you make of that reply? What kind of a reply is it? And what is his basic attitude? Now, the Bible doesn't tell us much about the tone or the attitude of a speech. It just gives you the speech. So you have to do it on your own. You have to, is Job furious? Is he demanding? Is he pleading? How do you hear his tone? I'm interested in that. And there's no right answer to this. It's just how you yourself evaluate the words that he's just said, okay? So take 4 minutes or so and reflect on that question. Evaluate Job's reply to Eliphaz and what's his attitude, okay? We can use the last few minutes we have to have some response to what some of you heard or paid or said in your group about that. How did you hear Job's response to Eliphaz? Anybody?
I like what you said about Job can only hear this in the ears of his own experience.
Yeah.
And I think when we are talking to people that are in some turmoil, we forget that. We want to solve
inevitably. Yeah, almost.
Right.
I remember years ago being a pastor and being called to the bedside of a woman whose husband had just died tragically and suddenly and unexpectedly. And, you know, I was fresh out of a PhD in Hebrew Bible, and I thought I knew a lot of stuff. And it was 2:00 in the morning. And I, right at that moment, learned that most of my theological wisdom meant very little at that moment. So for the next 3 to 4 hours, we were silent, she and I. And I held her hand and she wept. Well, that's one response, isn't it? I mean, I'm not saying it's the right response or necessary response, but certainly this is not the time for theological debate, I don't think.
Yep.
But that's the way the friends see it. It's theological debate. And we're going to find out why the more they go at it. Okay, anybody else? Yeah, Jeff.
Well, I confess that I Googled it. But it was interesting, and it was kind of what I thought. You know, what I saw is that, you know, we're trying to explain the mystery of evil.
Yep.
You know,
Mhm.
and perhaps it is due to the incredible complexity of humanity, and not due to God controlling everything and Satan controlling everything. And, you know, every time you step in something in somebody's yard and get it on your shoe, that wasn't because Satan made you step in it. It was because it's just everything's very complicated.
Somebody didn't pick up the poop, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just very complicated.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's a bad response at all, Jeff. I think that's a very helpful response. And somebody asked the question in my group, what's this book trying to teach us? Well, I think there are multiple lessons here. Certainly one of the lessons is exactly that one, that simple answers about the moral order of the universe are frankly impossible and ultimately dangerous. They limit human freedom and they limit God to a kind of great computer in the sky, which I think this author wants to say, nah, not going to work. Can't do it. And he's probably hearing this stuff. If I'm right that it's in the exile, he's hearing this stuff from people all the time. Well, we're in the exile because we didn't help the poor, and God chucked us over here in exile because that's what the prophet said. So that's got to be the way it goes. You do this, you get that. You do this, you get that. I mean, that sort of game. And the author of the book simply wants to say, no, I just haven't experienced that. I haven't seen that in my own life and experience. So I want to write this play and suggest to you, it's not quite so easy. Now, does it mean we're going to get an easy answer? I doubt it. The whole notion is to provide no easy answer, because there may not be one. It's going to say some stuff that's very provocative, all right, but the easy answer is not going to be available.
I saw Janet with her hand raised.
Yeah.
No, it's such a totally human response. You know, it's what did I do? It's like if my computer crashes, I'm sitting here going, what did I do?
Yeah, exactly.
What button did I push that I wasn't supposed to push? You know?
Right. Yeah, right.
But it's such a totally human desire to know, where did I go wrong?
Exactly.
And how do I fix it?
Exactly. And it has, we are driven to find rationales for why things happen. I mean, that's just what it means to be a human being. One of the things it means to figure out, to give an answer, to give a response. This is why bumper stickers are so popular. You know, they're responses. They're freeze-dried truth right there on the back of your car. But they're only, it's like Proverbs. They are not whole truths. They're partial truths. They're interesting, provocative, but not necessarily the whole thing. So the book is going to open us, I think, at least that much, to say, I've got to think again about this business, about the moral order of the universe. What is it like? The friends have it worked out. I mean, apparently, certainly Eliphaz does. We see this, take it for yourself, says Eliphaz. And Job's not having it. He's just not having it. And Job is certainly the author's mouthpiece here. I don't doubt that for a minute, that the author sees himself in the character of Job. Now, let's be clear about Job himself. Job is not a pleasant fellow. He's going to get a lot worse. You don't want to invite Job to a dinner party. He'll ruin it for you really fast. He's a very unpleasant fellow, and he's really arrogant. He's going to claim to know a whole lot more than he can know. But still, the question for us, though, is what do we do with Job? There are lots of Jobs in the world, lots of Jobs in the world. How do we respond? How do we reply? Okay, anybody else? Phil?
Well, we all take our turns being the unpleasant Job.
We do, absolutely. You're absolutely right.
And I want to apologize for leaving earlier. My youngest grandchild, Jillian, turned 15 today.
Oh, happy birthday to her.
And phoned me up, and you know, having not seen my grandchildren for a year and a half.
Oh dear, yes, well, you had to see that.
Job took second place tonight.
Well, give our best wishes to her. What a great thing. 15, what a great age.
Yes.
Okay, anybody else? Any other comment to make about any of that? Yes, Nancy.
There we go. One of the things that I noticed is that Job has no memory of the past.
Yeah.
He's had this long, beautiful, blessed life, and it's as though it never happened.
Absolutely.
He lives
absolutely
entirely
right.
in the present, and he doesn't think about the blessings of God that he has endured or enjoyed these 50 or 60 years. All he can think of is the past 6 weeks.
That's exactly right. And you're going to hear him say that quite directly, actually, in chapter 29. He's going to have this long chapter about how, oh, I wish things were the way they used to be when I was great. People shut their mouths when I walked by. I was so grand and all that stuff. But now it's not like that in chapter 30. Oh, my life is a wreck. So yeah, there is a kind of unpleasant arrogance and narcissism in the man. And you can't avoid that. You're absolutely right about that he's forgotten everything that happened to him before. Quite right. Quite right. But I suppose for the ongoing purposes of the drama of the narrative, that's an important claim to make. you have to deal with Job as he is now on the ash heap, I suppose. And then what are we going to do? What are we going to say? Okay. All right. Well, it's about time to stop. The next week, I want us to conclude the first cycle of speeches, and that will mean 2 more friends, Bildad and Zophar. It begins in chapter 8. That's Bildad's first speech. Job will respond in chapter 9. Chapter 9 is a very important chapter in this book, I think. It's filled with all manner of fascinating comments and ideas. Chapter 10 will also be Job's speech. And then chapter 11 is Zophar's first speech. I want you to ask yourself the question as you read those 2 speeches of the friends, where did they get their information? Eliphaz got his information from the vision of God. He went at some length. You remember how important that was to him. Where does Bildad get his information? And where does Zophar get his information? And then Job will respond to Zophar and the other friends, I would say, in chapters 12, 13, and 14. And that will conclude the first cycle. So next week, chapters 8 through 14. And we will, after we get through with that, you'll see sort of how the book is shaped and how it works. But then we'll have to make some judgments, of course, as we move on through it. Exactly what we can expect and exactly the surprises that may still be in store for us. Okay. Any other comments before we cease tonight? Thank you very much for coming again. I hope you have a chance to read those chapters for next week, and let's end with a word of prayer. Well, God, again, we are grateful for this spectacular and surprising book, which has been given to us in this remarkable series of ways by persons we don't know and writers we don't know and will never know. But thank you for being with us this night as we wrestle and struggle with its words, challenging, surprising, wonderful, shocking, amazing words. And as always, we are grateful for the gift of your love for each one of us. And we pray in your holy name. Amen. Thank you all. See you next week, huh?